Hey Mama, welcome to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Gibbs, wife, mama of 3, and doctor of the PhD kind. On this podcast, we talk honestly about high achievement, burnout, and what it looks like to lead well across home, work, and self. So if you're an ambitious mother scholar who's quietly exhausted by the pace you've been keeping and starting to realize that survival isn't the same as success, this podcast is for you. Mrs. Mummy PhD began during my own PhD journey as a wife and mama. Today, as a postdoctoral scholarly mama working across 2 leadership roles, this work has evolved. It's no longer just about finishing the PhD well, it's about creating sustainable ways of learning, leading, and living at any stage of your journey without losing yourself in the process. If you're ready to move from survival to restoration, you're in the right place. Let's begin. These are our journeys of becoming. Hey Mama, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I want to talk about rest in today's episode. Last week we talked about boundaries. This week we're going to be talking about rest and why we need to reclaim this, not as a reward, but as a complement to self-leadership. So this isn't a reward for doing the most work, for achieving the thing, but as something that is built into our routines and our systems as scholarly mamas who lead ourselves well. And so by the end of this episode, I hope that you will have a completely different relationship with rest, not as something that you earn, not as something that you collapse into when you've done the most and there's no other choice and your body's literally screaming at you and saying you need a break, but as something that you lead yourself toward with intention and with purpose and without guilt, most importantly. This is for the mama who has barely sat down, or at least really sat down in longer than she can remember. The one who thinks that rest for some reason feels like they're being lazy or they're not doing enough. And for the one who, the moment she does sit down, feels completely pulled back by her to-do list because she's finally gotten a few minutes for herself, but she's thinking about all the things that she needs to do. So this is for the mama who also tells herself, I will rest after I achieve the next goal, I write the next chapter, or I meet the next deadline, or after the kids are in bed. And the problem with this is that after never actually arrives because we always find something else to do. There's always something else to do. And so if this sounds like you, I see you. I completely see you. And I want you to know that I have been there too. I have been that mama. In fact, I am still learning how not to be that mama. And this episode is the episode that I wish that someone had said to me before my quiet burnout, before I had no choice but to step back. And so in this episode, I want to speak to the high achieving mama, right? Because here's the thing about being a high achieving woman in academic spaces or in, professional spaces and leadership roles is that we have been, in my opinion, deeply conditioned to believe that productivity equates worth, that whatever we're able to produce, that is a measure of our worth, our value, what we bring to the table. And that if you're not producing, then you are not valuable, you are not worth much. And I think in scholarly motherhood, this really amplifies even more because not only are you navigating research culture, academic culture, professional culture of overwork and output, you're also navigating the invisible load and the invisible labor of motherhood. It's that invisible work that we do as mums that never really gets rewarded, or it doesn't feel like there's a reward for that work. And so rest gets squeezed out of the equation. And I know that I need to rest. You know that you need to rest. There's no doubt in our minds that, yes, we need rest. We tell ourselves we need to rest. But even with knowing that we need that rest, somehow it's the first thing to go. And it's not because you don't know you need it. Like I said, we need it. We know we need it. But somewhere along the line, somewhere along this journey, rest became something that you felt as a mama who is high achieving and doing all the things. You felt like you had to justify that for some reason, and you had to earn it. And it was a reward that you get at the end of a very long list that never actually ends, right? A long list of tasks, a long list of things to do that never actually ends as a mama, never actually ends as a scholar, never actually ends as a professional, as a leader. And yet you think that at the end of that never ending line is when you get the privilege of rest. And it just doesn't add up. And I want to say this as gently as I possibly could, that I believe it's actually costing you more than you realize. And I think that as high achieving mamas, you see it everywhere. People are like, oh, I can't wait to finish. I can't wait to meet that deadline. I can't wait to finish my PhD. I can't wait to, be finished with all of this so that I can finally rest. And the trouble is that never actually happens. And it's that belief that's really costing us, this belief that we need to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And only when we achieve can we take a break. Only when we do the most are we entitled to give our bodies and our minds and our souls and our spirits an opportunity to rest. And so in our last episode, we talked about boundaries and, why boundaries are so crucial for self-leadership, and about how saying no is not you withdrawing or you not wanting to contribute or do the work, but it's actually giving you a sense of direction. It's giving you purpose. It's knowing where you want to lead your life and how you want to do so. And so many of you resonated with that. And that tells me something really, really important, that you are already beginning to see the need to create that space by being able to say no, by having boundaries, that you're actually seeing the need for that and you recognize the need for that. But here's a question that I want us all to sit with in today's episode. When you do manage to create that space, when you do say no to something, when you are enforcing those boundaries, what are you actually saying yes to? So just sit with that question for a minute. We talked about boundaries. We talked about saying no. We talked about understanding where to draw those limits. But when you are saying no to whatever it is, what are you actually saying yes to? And that's what I want to talk about in this episode, because if you're like most of the scholarly mamas I know, you're actually saying yes to the next thing on the list. So you're saying no to one task and saying yes to the next. You're filling that space with something else, something that feels productive, something that feels justified, something that feels like it counts and it matters. And so what you're not doing is actually resting. What you are not doing is actually giving your body an opportunity to recover. And without that recovery, without that space, your capacity, the very thing we talked about protecting in the last episode, it still becomes eroded. You see, rest for me is not the opposite of productivity. Rest is what makes productivity sustainable and possible, right? And more than that, for me, rest is a form of self-leadership. We talked about boundaries being an act of self-leadership, but rest is also a form of self-leadership, saying yes to rest with intention and purpose. There was a while ago where I was having a conversation with someone who also did her PhD as a mum and having the responsibilities of her 2 children, and raising them while she was, in the throes of her PhD. And as I was having this conversation with her, what became quite obvious for me from that conversation was that she was very proud of herself for achieving the goal of finishing her PhD, and that opened so many doors for her, and she had some amazing opportunities at the end of that. But what really stood out for me from that conversation was when she actually said, Michelle, I was there a lot of the time, but I wasn't really there with my kids. I was there, but I wasn't really there. And that really that really resonated for me in some ways, because when I experienced my own quiet burnout, that is how I felt. Like I was there, but I wasn't really there. Like I was there in body, but my mind was racing with all the things I needed to do. And, because there was so much on my plate and I said yes to so many things. And even the things I said no to, I then said yes to other things. And it really began to, erode that capacity. And for me, it was not just capacity, but presence was also disappearing, before my eyes. And I think even when we create space, even when we create that little extra margin and we talked about the analogy about the margins and scribbling on the page, and eventually those margins become really full. But even when we create space in those margins, what ends up happening is that if we haven't intentionally planned what we're going to do with that extra space that we've created, what will happen is that the space that has been reclaimed will then become filled with something else almost immediately. And that actually, when you reflect on that, you haven't really created any space at all. You haven't expanded your capacity at all. What you've done is you've filled the space that you've just created with more tasks and more things to do. And rest is not one of those things. Rest becomes the last thing to make it onto that margin, right? And I think for me, when I think about this, it reminds me of the fact that, yes, sometimes we create boundaries, but creating boundaries is not enough. Enforcing them sometimes is not even enough. It really requires us to give ourselves permission to actually recover within that space that we've created. And I think this is where a lot of us find ourselves. We know we're tired. We know we need to slow down. But we've been moving so fast and doing so much and pushing ourselves so hard for so long that stillness feels suspicious. It feels like, we're missing something. We're not filling the void. It feels that we've created a void and we're not filling it. And so it feels that we should be doing more and doing something with that space. And that discomfort, that restlessness in the rest period is worth paying attention to, because it tells us something about how deeply we've internalized the idea that our worth is in fact tied to what we can produce, that our worth is tied to our output, and that we're so focused on output and not focused enough on outcome that we then fill that space with more and more things, and we actually don't allow ourselves or give ourselves the permission that we need to be able to rest within that space and recover within that space. So how do we begin to do something about this? How do we begin to change this? I want to offer you a few things worth thinking about when it comes to rest, not as a reward, but as a form of self-leadership. And I want to be clear that these are not dramatic changes. Like I said, baby steps, little things, small shifts, small doable things that you can begin this week. So the first is that we think about rest as recovery. We talked about capacity. We talked about what you can realistically hold within a particular season of life. And I want to add something to that conversation today. So for me, capacity is not a fixed concept. It's something that expands and constricts based on the season of life that you're in. And one of the most powerful things that restores our capacity and allows us to expand it is that intentional recovery, not collapsing into rest, not just being less busy or creating space, but actually being really super intentional about genuinely creating restorative rest. So that may include sleep, movement that you enjoy, time that's unscheduled, undemanding, quiet time, reflection time, journaling, just quiet meditation, like just intentional time that you are not producing something. And so for me, the practical question here is very simple. What actually restores you? What restores you? I'm not talking about what people say should restore you. Like, oh, you should go to a spa, you should go and get your nails done. You should, like, that may be fine. That may work for you, but what actually restores you? I want you to think about this week, and I want you to treat the answer to this as really key information on how you can begin to lead yourself well. Because when you have discovered what actually restores you, maybe you want to get some thoughts out. Maybe you just want to reflect on how you've been feeling that week. Maybe you want to plan for the next week. Maybe you want to, maybe you want to set some goals. Maybe you want to reflect on goals that you've achieved. Maybe you want to write down a list of little wins that you've managed to accomplish in the last week, or little wins that you've managed to accomplish in the last month. Maybe you want to think about fun activities that you can do with the kids. Maybe you want to just daydream about your next move. Who knows? Whatever brings you that opportunity to just really reflect, to meditate, to pray, if that is your thing, to plan for the future, to daydream, to play with ideas, to play with, exciting things that you may want to pursue outside of work, to think about creative things that you want to engage in, to draw, to color, to paint, to take photos, to watch a movie, to plan a holiday, to think about a time in the future that you're looking forward to reflect on a time in the past that has been really transformative for you, to reflect on how far you've come, whatever that restorative rest looks like for you. Maybe it's just taking a nap. Maybe it's just taking a nap. So revolutionary, right? However whatever you think will help you to fill that cup emotionally, mentally, physically, it's a good time to do it. So this isn't about what other people think you should or shouldn't do with that time. It's about what actually restores you. How can you lead yourself to that intentional recovery? The next way that we can think about rest in terms of leadership is, and I mentioned this earlier, but rest is presence. And one of the things that I've noticed, even in myself and in conversations with scholarly mamas, is that we can be physically present and mentally absent at the same time. So we're with our children, but we're thinking about the paper that we need to write. We're sitting down and we're running through the week in our heads, but we're not actually engaging in the activity that's right in front of us. That kind of split presence is actually, I think, very exhausting. You don't actually notice how exhausting it is, but it really means that you are not fully present anywhere. You're not fully present with your work. You're not fully present with the kids. You're not fully present with your spouse. You're not fully present with whatever it is that you are doing. And I think that when you want to engage in real rest that actually restores you fully, It requires you to be present in the moment. If for you, let's say, rest is enjoying a fun activity with your spouse and you are fully present, that's restorative rest, right? If you are sitting down and reflecting and meditating, but all you're thinking about is, oh, I've got, in 5 minutes, I've got to go and do this, I've got to go and do that, I've got to send that email, I've got to, how are you going to actually allow your body to be present in that moment fully? I think that restorative rest requires you to fully show up in the moment that you are actually in. And I know that sounds very simple and basic, maybe even a little bit abstract, but I think the practical application of this really is about noticing where you are not being present and really grounding yourself in the present moment. Noticing when your mind is wandering everywhere else. Notice when you are physically still, but mentally you're racing, you're running in your mind. And when you notice that, just gently bringing yourself right back to the present moment. That is for me rest for self-leadership. That is self-leadership in action, where I'm saying, I've noticed that I'm not present in this moment, and I'm going to first notice that. I'm going to call that out, and I am going to ground myself in this present moment so I can fully enjoy this moment. I can fully be present, engage with the person who I'm sharing this moment with, and I can lead myself with intention. So the third way of using rest as a form of self-leadership is what I find the most powerful of them all, and that is rest as a resistance. I think in academia and in our professional cultures that reward overwork, we have this thing where rest is for the weak. And we treat exhaustion as this badge of honor, and it shows how committed we are. And that for me is a recipe for self-sacrifice. That we can measure how dedicated we are by how much we sacrifice ourselves. And for those of us who are mamas in those spaces, the pressure, as I said earlier, is even more intense because you're also navigating the invisible load, the invisible expectations to always be available, always be accommodating, always be the one who is showing up and doing it all. And I think in that context, choosing rest it's not a passive thing. It doesn't happen automatically, right? Choosing rest in those contexts and in those environments is actually a conscious decision where I'm saying my worth is not determined by my productivity, by my output. My value is not contingent on those things. I'm leading myself towards a life that is sustainable, habits that are sustainable, workflows that are sustainable. They're not just impressive. And I think that when we can view rest as resistance, that becomes quite a radical act where we can say, actually, I know what I bring to the table. And I want to continue bringing that to the table and more. And in order to do that, I need to allow myself rest. And that's not on the other end of burnout. That is with intention, with purpose, and with sustainability in mind so that I can actually keep up the high performance that I am able to bring to this table, that I am able to bring to my job, that I'm able to bring to my family, that I am able to show up for myself in all of this because my success is sustainable. And I'm going to be very honest with you. This is not easy, right? I'm not telling you this as somebody who's figured it all out and whose life is like perfect and, I've got everything in place. Absolutely not. There are times where I push too hard still. And there are times where I fill every gap still. And there are times where I arrive, on a Sunday night feeling like, oh my goodness, how did I get here again? But what I do have in this moment, and I did have this in the past, but sadly lost sight of it and quietly burnt out, is that awareness of noticing sooner, being able to pick up on that immediately and course correct a lot faster. And every time I choose rest, every time I choose it with intention, I believe that I am practicing self-leadership. So every time you choose rest, you are becoming better at leading yourself well. You are becoming better at creating sustainable success for yourself and for your future. So when you have a moment this week, even if it's just 5 minutes with a cup of tea, 5 minutes, it's all it takes. I want you to sit with these 3 questions. The first one is, when did I last rest without guilt? What a concept. When did I last rest and didn't feel guilty? And what would it feel like to give myself the permission to do that again and again and again? How lovely would that be? The second question is, what does rest actually look like for me? In the life I'm living right now, like in my current situation, what does rest look like? And the third is if rest is indeed a form of self-leadership, what is one tiny thing that I could do this week to lead myself towards that intentional recovery? How can I create that space for intentional recovery this week so that I can continue to lead myself towards sustainable success? I hope this episode has been helpful. We've talked about rest. We've talked about rest not being a reward, but rest being an intentional act of self-leadership where we're able to give ourselves space to recover, give ourselves space to rest, give ourselves space to enjoy the things in life that bring us joy, that bring us fulfillment, so that we can continue to show up in other areas of our life and lead others well by first leading ourselves well. So I hope this episode has been helpful. If it has, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and share it with another scholarly mama you know. Until then, continue to lead yourselves gently, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. If something in today's conversation resonated with you, I want you to know this. You don't need to have it all figured out before you take your next step. This work is all about learning to lead yourself first in ways that honor your capacity, your work, your home, and yourself without burning out in the process. If you'd like to continue the conversation beyond the podcast, you're warmly invited to join Scholarly Mamas The Letter, a quiet monthly newsletter for mother scholars who value purpose beyond titles, presence at home, and peace within. You can sign up at scholarlymamas.com. And if you're feeling stuck, stretched, or just not where you want to be, you can book a free 30-minute call to help you gain clarity and explore what support might look like in this season to get from where you are to where you want to be. You can also connect with me on social media at Mrs. Mummy PhD, where I share reflections on ambition, motherhood, sustainable self-leadership, all the things for high-achieving mamas like yourself. This, mama, is the quiet work of scholarly motherhood, and these are our journeys of becoming.